The pack all fell silent the moment Damon Cross raised his hand and spoke the words that ended everything. Alena Vos stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Just moments ago, she had believed this night would bring her the title she had waited 3 years for. Instead, Damon looked past her, toward the woman standing near the tall windows, and said the words that broke her world apart. "I choose Serafina Wells as my Luna." The room did not gasp. It did not need to. Every wolf in that hall already knew who Serafina was. Her family controlled half the trade routes in the northern valleys, and her father commanded a pack twice the size of Damon's own. Alena, on the other hand, had no family name worth mentioning. She had grown up in the orphan quarters at the edge of the territory, raised by pack elders who had little to spare and even less patience. Alena felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of a crowd only invited more cruelty. She lifted her chin and looked directly at Damon, searching his face for some trace of the man she thought she had known. She found nothing. His eyes were flat, calculating, already moving past her as though she were a piece of furniture no longer needed in the room. Serafina stepped forward, her silk dress catching the candlelight, and a small, satisfied smile touched her lips. She did not even bother to look at Alena. Why would she? She had already won. "Alena," said Damon, his voice cold and formal, as though reading from a legal document rather than speaking to someone he had once held in his arms. "Your position in this pack is no longer required. You have until sunrise to leave the Central Territory." A few of the older pack members shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke up. Alena understood why. Speaking against an alpha's decision, especially one backed by such a powerful alliance, was not something anyone dared to do. She was alone in that room, surrounded by people who had once called her friend, and not one of them met her eyes. She turned without a word and walked out of the hall, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of conversation begin again, already moving on, already forgetting her. By tomorrow, she would be nothing more than a story told in passing, a cautionary tale about what happens to those who love someone above their station. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold, and Alena welcomed it. It gave her something to focus on besides the ache spreading through her chest. She made her way to the small cabin she had lived in during her time as Damon's intended mate, knowing it would not be hers for much longer. She had few possessions to gather. A worn travel bag, 2 changes of clothing, a small wooden box that had belonged to her mother, and a knife her guardian had given her the day she turned 16. As she packed, she heard voices outside her window. 2 guards were talking in hushed tones, but the night was quiet enough that their words carried. "Did you hear the Alpha King is passing through tonight?" one of them said. "Word came from the border scouts an hour ago." "The Alpha King himself?" the other guard asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Here, in our territory. Just passing through, apparently. Doing one of his surprise inspections. You know how he is. Doesn't trust reports. Wants to see things with his own eyes." Alena paused, her hand resting on the small wooden box. She had heard stories about Kieran Ashgrove, the Alpha King who ruled over every pack in the northern lands. Some said he was fair and just, a leader who genuinely cared about the wolves under his protection. Others whispered that he was untouchable, cold in his own way, a man who had given up on trusting anyone after the betrayals that marked his early years as king. Alena had never expected to cross paths with someone so far above her station. Kings did not concern themselves with orphan wolves who had just been publicly discarded. She finished packing quickly, tying the bag shut with trembling fingers. She planned to leave before sunrise, just as Damon had ordered, though she intended to be long gone before anyone noticed. She had heard rumors that the border territories, while harsh, at least offered a kind of freedom that the central packs did not. No politics. No alliances. No one who cared enough to hurt you. As she stepped out into the night, bag slung over her shoulder, she noticed the increased activity near the main square. Guards moved with more purpose than usual, and several pack members she recognized were hurrying toward the central gate, whispering excitedly among themselves. It seemed the news of the Alpha King's arrival had spread quickly. Alena kept to the shadows, avoiding the main paths. She had no desire to be seen, especially not by Serafina's people, who had already begun treating her with open disdain in the hours since the announcement. She had overheard two of Serafina's personal guards mocking her earlier that evening, laughing about how quickly she had been replaced, as though her years of devotion to the pack meant nothing at all. She made her way toward the eastern path that would lead her out of the Central Territory and toward the borderlands. It was longer than the main road, but it was quieter, and quiet was exactly what she needed. Her mind raced with everything that had happened. 3 years of loyalty, of standing beside Damon during difficult negotiations, of helping him manage disputes between smaller packs, of believing that what they shared was real. All of it erased in the span of a single sentence. She thought about her mother, gone now for over a decade, and wondered what she would have said if she could see her daughter in this moment. Her mother had always told her that worth was not measured in gold or lineage, but Alena had spent so long trying to prove herself worthy of a place she never truly belonged to that she had almost forgotten those words. As she reached the edge of the training grounds, she heard raised voices ahead. She slowed her pace, staying close to the tree line, and saw a group of guards standing near the gate, clearly agitated about something. She could not make out the details, but she recognized the guard as belonging to Serafina's personal escort, the same ones who had mocked her earlier. Curiosity, or perhaps simple exhaustion that made her careless, drew her a few steps closer. She caught sight of a young wolf, barely more than a child, cowering near the guards. He seemed to have wandered too close to the training grounds and was now being harshly reprimanded, one of the guards gripping his arm tightly enough to make the boy wince. Elena's instincts, honed from years of caring for younger pack members during her time as Damon's intended Luna, kicked in before she could stop herself. She stepped out from the shadows. "That is enough," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He is just a child. Let him go." The guard turned toward her, his expression shifting from irritation to amusement when he recognized her. "Well, look who it is," he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "The rejected one. Shouldn't you be halfway to the border by now? Sunrise comes quickly." "I will leave when I am ready," Alena replied, keeping her voice calm despite the fear tightening in her chest. "But you will let that boy go first." The guard laughed and released the boy's arm, though not out of kindness. He simply seemed to find her defiance entertaining rather than threatening. The boy scrambled away, disappearing into the darkness without looking back. "You always did have a habit of inserting yourself where you don't belong," the guard said, taking a step toward her. Maybe that's why Damon finally came to his senses. Alena felt her hands tighten into fists at her sides, anger beginning to override her exhaustion. She had endured enough humiliation for one night, and something about this guard's smugness ignited a spark of fury she hadn't expected to feel so soon after her rejection. Before she could respond, a low voice cut through the tension, coming from somewhere behind the guards. "Is there a problem here?" The guards turned sharply, their postures shifting immediately from casual cruelty to rigid attention. Alena looked past them and saw a tall figure emerging from the darkness, dressed simply, without any of the ceremonial markings that typically indicated rank or status. But something about the way he carried himself, the quiet authority in his voice, made it clear that this was no ordinary traveler passing through. The guards exchanged nervous glances, clearly recognizing something Alena did not yet understand. One of them stammered out a response, his earlier confidence completely gone. "No problem here, sir. Just a misunderstanding." The stranger's eyes moved past the guards and settled on Alena, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold his gaze. There was something unsettling about the way he observed her, as though he were seeing far more than her tired eyes and travel bags suggested. "It did not look like a misunderstanding to me," he said, his tone even but carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. "It looked like grown wolves harassing a child, and now threatening a woman who did nothing but intervene." The guards had no response to that. Alena watched, confused and increasingly aware that something significant was happening, though she could not yet piece together exactly what. "Leave," the stranger said simply, and the guards obeyed instantly, practically tripping over themselves in their haste to disappear into the night. Alena stood frozen, uncertain whether she should thank the stranger or continue on her way as quickly as possible. Before she could decide, he spoke again, his gaze still fixed on her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "You should not be walking alone at this hour," he said. "Especially not after what happened tonight." Elena's breath caught. He knew. Somehow, this stranger already knew about her rejection, about the humiliation she had suffered in front of the entire pack hall just hours ago. She studied him more carefully now, taking in the quiet confidence in his stance, the way even the shadows around him seemed to acknowledge his presence. "Who are you?" she asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer, refusing to fully accept it. The stranger's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps the faintest trace of sympathy. "Someone who happened to be passing through at exactly the right moment," he said, his answer deliberately vague. "And someone who thinks you deserve far better than what this pack has shown you tonight." Elena felt a chill run through her, though not entirely from fear. There was something in his words, something in the way he looked at her, that told her this chance encounter was not as simple as it seemed. She did not yet know that the man standing before her rode over every pack in the Northern Territories, or that this single moment on a quiet path near the training grounds would change the course of both their lives forever. All she knew was that for the first time since Damon's rejection, someone had looked at her not with pity or contempt, but with something that felt strangely like respect. She had no way of knowing that sunrise would not bring the quiet escape she had planned, but instead the beginning of a story far larger than anything she could have imagined. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat on a fallen log near the edge of the training grounds, her travel bag beside her, watching the stranger who had just chased off two of Serafina's guards with nothing more than a few quiet words. He had not left after the confrontation. Instead, he stood a short distance away, studying the tree line as though searching for something, or perhaps simply giving her time to steady her breathing. "You are not from this pack," she finally said, breaking the silence between them. "No," he agreed. "I am not." "Then why does everyone react to you the way they did?" Elena pressed. "Those guards looked ready to run the moment they saw you." The stranger turned to face her fully for the first time, and in the pale moonlight, she noticed details she had missed before. His posture carried the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence, not the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself. His eyes held a weight that seemed far older than his face suggested. "My name is Kieran," he said simply. "Kieran Ashgrove." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard that name spoken with reverence, fear, and admiration all at once, though never in casual conversation, and certainly never directed at her. Kieran Ashgrove rode every pack across the Northern Territories. His decisions shaped alliances, ended conflicts, and determined the fate of packs far more powerful than the one that had just discarded her. She had assumed, when the guards mentioned the Alpha King passing through, that he would remain distant, surrounded by advisors and guards, untouchable and unreachable. She had never imagined standing 3 feet away from him on a quiet forest path, her belongings still packed for an uncertain journey to the border territories. "You are the Alpha King," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it too loudly might make the situation more real than she could handle. "I am," Kieran confirmed, watching her carefully, as though gauging her reaction. Elena felt a fresh wave of exhaustion wash over her, though this one carried a different weight than the humiliation she had endured earlier that night. She did not know what to say to a king, had no experience navigating conversations at such a level, and found herself suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after everything that had happened. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Not passing through the territory, but here, on this path, talking to me." Kieran considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I make it a habit to observe my territories directly rather than relying solely on reports from pack leaders," he said. "Reports can be shaped to present whatever picture the leader wants me to see. Tonight, I witnessed something reports would never capture. I watched the pack publicly humiliate one of its own, strip her of her position, and then allow her to be harassed on her way out, simply because a wealthier alliance offered more advantage than loyalty ever could." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed that he had witnessed her rejection, though something about the way he described it, the clear disapproval in his tone, made her feel slightly less alone in her humiliation. "You saw what happened in the pack hall," she said quietly. "I did," Kieran confirmed. And I have seen many things in my years as king, Alena. Alliances built on convenience rather than loyalty rarely end well. Damon Cross has made a decision tonight that he will likely come to regret, though regret rarely undoes damage already done. Alena studied him, surprised by the directness of his words. Most people, especially those in positions of power, avoided openly criticizing the decisions of pack leaders, understanding the delicate balance that held the Northern Territories together. Yet Kieran spoke plainly, without hesitation, as though truth mattered more to him than diplomatic caution. What happens now? Alena asked. To me, I mean. Damon ordered me to leave the Central Territory by sunrise. I was planning to head toward the borderlands. The border territories are not kind to wolves traveling alone, especially not at this time of year, Kieran said. Rogue packs have grown bolder in recent months, and the protection typically offered by Central Authority does not extend that far. Alena felt a flicker of fear at his words, though she tried to hide it. I have no other options, she said. This pack made its decision clear tonight. I have nowhere else to go. Kieran studied her for a long moment, and Alena had the distinct impression that he was weighing something carefully, considering options she could not yet see. I could offer you a position within my own court, he said finally. Alena blinked, certain she had misheard him. Your court? She repeated. Why would the Alpha King offer a position to someone just rejected and cast out by her own pack? Because talent and character should not be measured by the size of one's inheritance, Kieran said. I have observed how you conduct yourself tonight, both in the pack hall, though I was not physically present. Word travels quickly among my scouts, and here on this path, defending a child who was not even yours to protect. That tells me more about your worth than any title or alliance ever could. Alena felt something shift inside her chest, a strange mixture of hope and suspicion. She had trusted Damon completely, had believed in promises that ultimately meant nothing when tested against a more advantageous offer. She was not eager to place her trust so quickly in another powerful man, even one who wore the title of king. Forgive me, she said carefully, but I have learned recently that powerful men do not always mean what they say. What would you expect in return for this position? Kieran did not seem offended by her question. If anything, something like approval flickered across his expression. Nothing beyond honest service, he said. I need someone within my court who understands the Northern Territories from the perspective of those without power or wealth, someone who can help me see situations that my advisors, most of whom come from privileged backgrounds themselves, might overlook. You would have a genuine role, Alena, not a symbolic one meant to appease anyone or serve as leverage in some larger political game. Alena hesitated, torn between her instinct toward caution and the practical reality of her situation. The border territories offered nothing but uncertainty and danger. Kieran's offer, however unexpected, at least promised stability and purpose. I do not know you, she said finally. I do not know if I can trust this offer, or you. That is a fair concern, Kieran replied. I would not ask you to trust me blindly. Come to my court, observe how things are run, and if at any point you feel this arrangement does not serve you honestly, you are free to leave. I will not hold you against your will, nor will I punish you for choosing to walk away. Alena studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any flicker of the calculating coldness she had seen in Damon's eyes just hours earlier. She found none. Kieran's expression remained steady, patient, without the urgency of someone trying to manipulate her into a decision. She thought about the border territories, about rogue packs and uncertain protection, about the very real possibility that she might not survive the journey alone. She thought about her mother's words, about what not being measured by wealth or lineage, and wondered if perhaps this strange, unexpected offer was exactly the kind of opportunity her mother would have wanted her to take. All right, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. I will come to your court. But I want to be clear that I am not doing this out of desperation alone. I am doing this because, for the first time tonight, someone has looked at me and seen more than my lack of status. Kieran's expression softened slightly, something that might have been the beginning of a genuine smile touching the corner of his mouth. That is exactly the reason I hoped you would choose, he said. The journey to Kieran's territory took the better part of 2 days, traveling first by horseback and then through winding mountain paths that Elena had never seen before. Kieran traveled with a small group of guards, far fewer than she expected for someone of his rank, and she noticed that he treated each of them with the same directness and respect he had shown her, listening carefully to their observations, asking genuine questions rather than issuing constant commands. As they traveled, Elena learned more about the political landscape of the Northern Territories, about the delicate balance Kieran maintained between dozens of packs, each with their own ambitions and grievances. She began to understand why he valued perspectives from outside the traditional power structures, why someone raised without wealth or status might see dangers and opportunities that his advisors, comfortable in their positions, could easily miss. When they finally arrived at Kieran's central stronghold, Elena found herself standing before a fortress unlike anything she had seen before, built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast valley where smaller settlements spread out like scattered stars. The scale of it should have intimidated her, and in some ways it did, but she also felt a strange sense of possibility, as though this place might offer her the chance to become something more than what Damon's pack had allowed her to be. Kieran assigned her quarters within the eastern wing of the stronghold, modest but comfortable, and introduced her to a woman named Marguerite, an older wolf who served as the head of the household staff and would help Elena settle into her new role. Marguerite proved kind but no nonsense, quickly explaining the daily rhythms of court life and the various responsibilities Elena would begin taking on in the following days. Word spread quickly through Kieran's court about the new arrival, and Elena noticed the curious glances and hushed whispers that followed her through the corridors during her first few days. Some of Kieran's advisors, she quickly realized, did not share his conviction that what existed beyond wealth and lineage. A counselor named Edmund Blackwood, in particular, seemed to view her presence with open suspicion, questioning in council meetings why the king would elevate someone with no formal training or connections into a position of influence. Elena bore these challenges with the same quiet dignity she had shown during her rejection, refusing to let doubt or hostility diminish her resolve. She threw herself into learning everything she could about the Northern Territories, studying trade agreements, pack histories, and the complex web of alliances that Kieran navigated daily. Slowly, she began contributing genuine insight during council discussions, offering perspectives on how certain policies might affect smaller, less wealthy packs, insights that came directly from her own experience growing up without status or protection. Kieran, for his part, made a point of publicly acknowledging her contributions, even when Edmund and other skeptical advisors raised objections. Elena noticed how this created a subtle shift in the court's perception of her, transforming her from an unexpected outsider into someone whose opinions carried genuine weight. Yet even as she settled into this new life, Elena could not fully escape the shadow of what had happened in Damon's pack. Word eventually reached her, carried by traveling merchants and messengers passing through the stronghold, that Damon's alliance with Seraphina's family had solidified quickly, with formal ceremonies already being planned. She felt a strange numbness upon hearing this news, no longer the sharp pain of fresh betrayal, but something quieter, more resigned, as though she were hearing about events that had happened to a different person entirely. She did not yet know that Seraphina's family harbored ambitions far darker than simple wealth and alliance, ambitions that would soon draw Elena back into a conflict she thought she had left behind, one that would test not only her own resolve, but the strength of the fragile trust growing between herself and the Alpha King who had chosen to see her worth when everyone else had looked away. 3 months had passed since Elena arrived at Kieran's stronghold, and in that time, she had grown from a hesitant newcomer into someone whose presence in council meetings was rarely questioned anymore. Even Edmund Blackwood, though still reserved in his approval, had begun to acknowledge her insights with something resembling respect. Elena found a rhythm to her days that felt, for the first time in years, genuinely settled. She rose early, reviewed correspondence from smaller packs seeking Kieran's counsel, and spent her afternoon studying territorial maps and trade agreements with a dedication that surprised even Marguerite. It was on an ordinary afternoon, while reviewing a stack of letters from border settlements, that Elena noticed something unusual. A series of trade requests from a small outpost near the eastern border mentioned shipments of unusual size, materials that seemed disproportionate to the outpost's stated needs. She might have dismissed it as a simple accounting error, except that the outpost in question happened to fall under the influence of Seraphina's family, the very alliance that had replaced her in Damon's pack. Elena brought the discrepancy to Kieran's attention that evening, finding him alone in his study, reviewing his own set of reports by candlelight. "This seems unusual," she said, laying the letters across his desk. The quantities requested do not match what a settlement of this size would reasonably need, not for legitimate trade purposes. Kieran studied the document carefully, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused concern. "You have a sharp eye," he said. "This does look irregular. What do you make of it?" "I am not certain," Alena admitted. "But given the outpost's connection to Serafina's family, I thought it worth bringing to your attention rather than dismissing it as clerical error." Kieran nodded slowly, setting the letters aside. "I will have my scouts investigate quietly," he said. "If there is something happening beneath the surface here, I would rather understand it fully before taking any action that might provoke an unnecessary conflict." Over the following weeks, Kieran's scouts confirmed Elena's suspicions, though what they uncovered proved far more troubling than either of them had anticipated. The unusual shipments were not simple trade goods, but resources typically used to fortify defensive structures and equip armed patrols far beyond what any legitimate settlement required. Furthermore, the scouts discovered evidence linking Serafina's family to a rogue faction operating along the eastern border, wolves who had broken away from central authority years earlier and had been quietly rebuilding their strength ever since, waiting for the right moment to challenge Kieran's rule. The implications settled over Alena with a growing sense of dread. If Serafina's family had been secretly supporting this rogue faction, then Damon's alliance with them meant his own pack had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, become entangled in a conspiracy that threatened the stability of the entire Northern Territory. Kieran called an emergency council meeting to discuss the findings, and Alena found herself seated at the table alongside advisors who, only months earlier, had questioned why she deserved a place among them at all. Now, they listened intently as she laid out the timeline of unusual shipments, cross-referencing them with reports of increased rogue activity along the border. "This is a serious accusation," Edmund said, though his tone carried none of the dismissiveness Alena remembered from her early days at court. "If Serafina's family has been arming a rogue faction, this goes beyond simple political maneuvering. This is treason against the alliance structure that keeps our territory stable. We need more concrete evidence before making any formal accusations," Kieran said, his voice measured despite the gravity of the situation. "An error here could ignite a conflict we are not prepared to fight, especially if Serafina's family has genuine allies among the other packs." Alena volunteered to help continue the investigation, given her first-hand knowledge of Damon's pack structure and her understanding of how alliances within that territory typically operated. Kieran hesitated before agreeing, clearly weighing the risk of drawing her back into proximity with the very people who had once discarded her. "Are you certain you want to involve yourself this deeply?" he asked her privately after the council meeting had ended. "This could mean confronting people from your past, people who hurt you." Alena considered his question carefully before answering. "I am not doing this for revenge," she said. "I am doing this because I understand this situation in ways your other advisors cannot, and because I believe in what you are trying to protect. If Damon's pack has become entangled in something dangerous, ignoring that possibility would not make it disappear." Kieran studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his expression before he nodded. "Then we proceed carefully," he said. "I will not risk your safety unnecessarily." Over the following weeks, Alena worked alongside Kieran's scouts, piecing together a clearer picture of the conspiracy. She recognized certain names mentioned in intercepted correspondence, minor officials within Damon's pack who had always seemed overly ambitious for their modest positions. She began to understand that Serafina's family had likely orchestrated the alliance with Damon not out of genuine affection or even simple political convenience, but as a calculated move to gain influence over a pack strategically positioned near the eastern border, close enough to support the rogue faction without drawing immediate suspicion from central authority. The investigation, however, did not remain quiet for long. During a routine visit to a border settlement to verify certain shipping records, Alena and a small escort of Kieran's guards were ambushed on the road. The attack came suddenly, wolves emerging from the tree line with clear intent to capture rather than simply confront. Elena's escort fought them off, though not without difficulty, and it became immediately clear that the attackers had specifically targeted her, calling out her name amid the chaos rather than focusing their efforts on the guards protecting her. When word reached Kieran of the attack, he abandoned his afternoon council session immediately, riding out personally to meet the returning party rather than waiting for a formal report. Alena, shaken but unharmed thanks to the quick actions of her escort, found herself swept into his study once again, this time with Kieran pacing rather than seated calmly behind his desk. "They knew your name," he said, his voice tighter than she had heard it before. "This was not a random attack. Someone specifically wanted you captured." Elena's mind raced, trying to understand why she, of all people, would become such a specific target. "I have no information that could threaten anyone significantly," she said. "I am not privy to your most sensitive plans. I only helped identify the initial discrepancy in the shipping records." "That may be exactly the problem," Kieran said grimly. "You have knowledge from your time in Damon's pack that could expose exactly how deep this conspiracy runs, details about pack structure, personal relationships, financial arrangements that outsiders would never have access to. If Serafina's family suspects you have shared this knowledge with me, or fears that you might recognize something that confirms their involvement beyond doubt, removing you becomes a priority for them." Alena felt a chill settle over her as the implications became clear. She was no longer simply a witness to political maneuvering from a safe distance. She had become a target, someone whose knowledge and presence posed a genuine threat to a conspiracy that clearly had far-reaching ambitions. "What happens now?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would not be simple. Kieran stopped pacing and looked at her directly, his expression a complex mixture of concern and something else, something Alena had noticed growing between them over the past months but had never openly acknowledged. "Now, I ensure your protection becomes a priority equal to any other matter of state," he said. "I will not allow what happened on that road to happen again." Alena wanted to protest, to insist that she did not require special protection beyond what any member of his court would receive, but something in his tone told her this was not a decision open for negotiation. In the days that followed, Kieran assigned additional guards to accompany Alena whenever she left the central stronghold, and he personally reviewed every piece of correspondence related to the ongoing investigation before allowing it to be shared more broadly among the council. Edmund, surprisingly, became one of Elena's strongest advocates during this period, having grown to respect the sharpness of her insight over the preceding months, and now genuinely concerned about the danger she faced. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to uncover troubling details. Kieran's scouts confirmed that the rogue faction along the eastern border had grown significantly stronger than anyone previously realized, their numbers swelled by wolves recruited from smaller, disaffected packs who felt overlooked by central authority. Serafina's family, it became increasingly clear, viewed this faction not merely as a distant ally, but as a tool for eventually challenging Kieran's rule entirely, positioning themselves to claim greater power once the current structure of alliances collapsed. Damon's pack, Alena realized with growing unease, sat directly in the path of any conflict that might emerge from this conspiracy, its territory serving as a crucial buffer zone between the rogue faction and Kieran's central stronghold. Whether Damon himself understood the full extent of what he had aligned himself with remained unclear, though Alena found it difficult to feel much sympathy for him regardless of his awareness. During a quiet evening in Kieran's study, as they reviewed the latest reports together, Alena found herself asking a question that had been weighing on her mind for weeks. "Do you think Damon knows what Serafina's family is truly planning?" she asked. Kieran considered the question carefully before responding. "I think Damon made a choice based on wealth and convenience, without fully considering the deeper implications of that alliance," he said. "Whether he remains ignorant of their true intentions now, or has simply chosen not to look too closely, the result is the same. His pack has become entangled in something far more dangerous than he likely anticipated." Alena nodded slowly, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions she had not expected. She still carried the sting of her rejection, though it had faded considerably during her months at Kieran's court. But she also found herself feeling a strange sense of concern for the pack she had once called home, for the ordinary wolves who had no involvement in these larger political machinations and would nonetheless suffer if conflict erupted. As the investigation progressed, tensions within Kieran's court grew increasingly apparent. Some advisors pushed for immediate, decisive action against Serafina's family, arguing that waiting only allowed the rogue faction more time to strengthen its position. Others, including Kieran himself, remained cautious, understanding that accusing a powerful family of treason without absolute proof could fracture alliances that had taken years to build, potentially driving other hesitant packs into the rogue faction's growing ranks out of fear or resentment. Alena found herself increasingly drawn into these strategic discussions, her perspective valued not despite her humble origins, but precisely because of them. She understood, in ways that many of Kieran's advisors did not, how ordinary wolves within smaller packs viewed the actions of powerful families like Seraphina's, how quickly resentment could build when those with wealth and status seemed to operate by different rules than everyone else. It was during one such discussion, late in the evening after most of the council had retired for the night, that Kieran said something that caught Elena entirely off guard. "I want you to know," he said, setting aside the report he had been reviewing, "that regardless of how this situation unfolds, I do not regret bringing you into my court. Your insight has proven invaluable, and your courage in continuing this investigation despite the danger to yourself speaks to a character I have rarely encountered, even among those raised with every advantage." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unprepared for such direct acknowledgement. "Thank you," she managed. "Though I suspect any capable advisor would have noticed the same discrepancies given enough time." "Perhaps," Kieran said, though something in his tone suggested he did not entirely believe that. "But not every advisor would have shown the same willingness to walk directly back into danger for the sake of protecting people they no longer owed any loyalty to." Elena considered his words carefully, recognizing the truth in them even as she struggled to articulate exactly why she had chosen to remain so deeply involved in an investigation that had already put her life at risk once. Perhaps it was not entirely about proving her worth, or even about protecting the innocent wolves in Damon's pack who had no part in these larger conspiracies. Perhaps, she realized slowly, it had become about something else entirely, about the growing sense of purpose and belonging she had found within Kieran's court, and about the man himself, whose quiet strength and unwavering fairness had shown her a version of leadership she had never expected to encounter. Neither of them spoke further on the matter that evening, though something had shifted subtly in the space between them, an acknowledgement of connection that neither felt ready to name directly. Elena returned to her quarters that night with her mind racing, uncertain whether the danger surrounding her came only from the conspiracy threatening the Northern Territories, or from the growing feelings she could no longer entirely deny, feelings that carried risks of their own, given everything at stake for the man who now occupied so much of her thoughts. She did not yet know that the conspiracy would soon force both of them into a confrontation that would test not only their strategic alliance, but the depth of loyalty and sacrifice each was willing to offer the other, in ways neither could fully anticipate. The confrontation Elena feared arrived sooner than anyone expected. A messenger arrived at the stronghold one morning, breathless from hard riding, carrying a sealed letter bearing the emblem of Seraphina's family. Kieran opened it in the presence of his full council, his expression darkening with each line he read. "They know we have uncovered their involvement with the rogue faction," he said, setting the letter down on the table before him. "They are demanding that I hand Elena over to them, claiming she stole confidential documents during her time in Damon's pack and must answer for it under their own jurisdiction." The council erupted into immediate debate, some advisors arguing that refusing such a demand could be framed as evidence that Kieran himself was obstructing legitimate justice, while others insisted the accusation against Elena was nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to silence her before she could reveal more damaging information. Elena sat quietly through the discussion, her hands folded tightly in her lap, waiting to hear what Kieran would decide. She had grown to trust him over these past months, but this moment felt different, heavier, a test of whether that trust had been well placed. Finally, Kieran raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "I will not hand Elena over to anyone," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a king who had made his decision and would not be moved. "The accusation against her is baseless, designed to remove someone who has helped expose a conspiracy that threatens every pack under my protection. If Seraphina's family wishes to pursue this matter further, they may bring genuine evidence before a proper tribunal, one I will personally oversee to ensure fairness. I will not simply surrender a member of my court to appease a family already suspected of treason." Edmund, seated near the head of the table, nodded in firm agreement. "The king is right," he said. "Surrendering Elena would not only be unjust, it would signal weakness at exactly the moment we need to project strength." The messenger, upon hearing Kieran's refusal, departed quickly, and within days, word spread that Seraphina's family had begun mobilizing forces along the eastern border, framing the refusal as proof that Kieran intended to unjustly favor an outsider over the legitimate concerns of an established pack alliance. Elena felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her, worried that her presence had become the spark that might ignite a much larger conflict. I did not mean for this to happen, she said to Kieran privately, after another tense counsel session had ended. Perhaps if I had never come to your court, none of this would be escalating so quickly. Kieran turned to face her, his expression firm but not unkind. Do not mistake the actions of a conspiracy already years in the making for something you caused, he said. Serafina's family has been building toward this moment long before you ever arrived here. Your presence simply accelerated the timeline of a conflict that was always going to happen eventually. I would rather face it now, with clear evidence and genuine allies, than later, when their position might have grown even stronger. Elena appreciated his reassurance, though the guilt did not entirely fade. She spent the following days assisting with preparations, helping Kieran's advisors organize supplies and coordinate with allied packs who remained loyal to central authority. During this time, she received an unexpected visitor, one she had not anticipated seeing again. Damon arrived at the stronghold under a flag of parley, requesting a private audience with Elena before any formal negotiations began between Kieran and the rogue faction. Kieran, though clearly reluctant, agreed to allow the meeting, insisting only that guards remain nearby for Elena's protection. Elena met Damon in a small receiving room, her posture straight, her expression carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. Damon looked different than she remembered, the confidence that had once defined him now tinged with something that looked uncomfortably like regret. Elena, he began, his voice hesitant in a way she had never heard from him before. I did not know the extent of what Serafina's family was involved in. I made my choice based on wealth and alliance, believing it would strengthen my pack's position. I never imagined it would lead to something like this. Elena studied him carefully, searching for the sincerity behind his words, though she found herself feeling strangely detached from the pain his rejection had once caused her. That choice, she said evenly, cost me everything I had built within your pack, and very nearly cost me my life when Serafina's people tried to capture me on the road. Whether you understood the full implications of your alliance or not does not change the harm it caused. I know, Damon said, his shoulders sagging slightly. I have come to ask if there is anything I can do to help resolve this conflict, to make amends for the position my choices have placed you in. Elena considered his offer carefully before responding. If you wish to help, she said, then provide honest testimony about what you know of Serafina's family's dealings with the rogue faction. Do not protect them out of loyalty to an alliance that has already proven itself far more dangerous than you realized. That would do more good than any private apology offered to me alone. Damon nodded slowly, seeming to accept the wisdom of her suggestion, though Elena could see the difficulty in his expression, the recognition that providing such testimony would mean formally severing his alliance with Serafina's family, an alliance he had chosen over her only months earlier. I am sorry, Elena, he said quietly, before turning to leave the room. For everything. Elena did not respond immediately, watching him go with a complicated mixture of emotions. Some part of her recognized this apology as genuine, but she also understood that sorrow after the fact did not undo the damage already done, nor did it change the fact that she had found something within Kieran's court that Damon's alliance, however wealthy, could never have offered her, genuine respect and a sense of purpose beyond simply being someone's chosen mate. When she returned to Kieran's study to report on the conversation, she found him waiting, his expression carefully neutral, though she noticed a tension in his posture that had not been there before her meeting with Damon. He offered to provide testimony against Serafina's family, she said, relaying the details of their conversation. That could prove valuable, Kieran said, though his tone remained measured. Formal testimony from someone within their own alliance structure would strengthen our position considerably when this eventually reaches a tribunal, assuming we resolve the immediate conflict without excessive bloodshed. Elena studied him carefully, noticing something unspoken beneath his words. Are you concerned about something else? She asked directly. Kieran hesitated before answering, an unusual pause for someone typically so measured in his responses. I am concerned about the growing military mobilization along the eastern border, he admitted. Serafina's family has moved faster than I anticipated, likely because they understand that delay only strengthens my position. If negotiations fail, this could escalate into open conflict far sooner than any of us are fully prepared for. What will you do? Elena asked. I will lead the defense personally, Kieran said. I will not ask my people to face this danger while I remain safely within these walls. Alena felt a flash of fear at his words, though she understood immediately why he would make such a choice. That is a significant risk, she said. You are the central authority holding these territories together. If something happens to you during this conflict, the consequences could be far worse than anything Serafina's family has orchestrated so far. I am aware of the risk, Karen said. But leadership that hides from danger while sending others to face it in their place is not leadership I am willing to embody. I have built my role on the principle that worth and courage matter more than status or wealth, and I cannot abandon that principle now, when it matters most. Alena wanted to argue further, to insist that there must be another way, some strategy that did not require Karen to place himself directly in harm's way. But she also recognized, with a clarity that surprised her, that this willingness to risk everything for the sake of principle was precisely what had drawn her to trust him in the first place, precisely what distinguished him from Damon, who had chosen convenience and wealth over loyalty and genuine care. In the days that followed, negotiations between Kieran's representatives and Serafina's family broke down entirely, each side accusing the other of bad faith and refusing to yield on key demands. Damon, true to his word, provided formal testimony detailing his knowledge of Serafina's family's dealings with the rogue faction, testimony that further strengthened Kieran's position but also confirmed that armed conflict had become nearly unavoidable. The rogue faction, emboldened by Serafina's family's support and resources, began moving toward the border territories in greater numbers than Kieran's scouts had previously reported, suggesting that the conspiracy had been preparing for this confrontation far longer than anyone initially realized. Kieran convened his council one final time before the situation escalated fully into open conflict, laying out his strategy for defending the eastern border while minimizing casualties among both his own forces and the smaller, disaffected Parks who had been drawn into the rogue faction's ranks, wolves he still hoped to eventually bring back under the protection of central authority once the immediate threat had been addressed. Alena insisted on accompanying the defensive forces, despite Kieran's initial reluctance to allow it, arguing that her knowledge of Damon's pack structure and her understanding of how the rogue faction likely coordinated with Serafina's family could prove valuable during the actual confrontation. Kieran eventually relented, though he assigned a dedicated group of guards specifically tasked with ensuring her safety throughout the coming conflict. As they prepared to depart for the eastern border, Alena found a quiet moment alone with Kieran, both of them aware that the coming days would test everything they had built together, both strategically and personally. Whatever happens, Alena said, meeting his gaze directly, I want you to know that these past months have given me something I thought I had lost entirely after that night in the park hall. A sense of purpose, and genuine respect from someone whose opinion I have come to value deeply. Kieran's expression softened, the weight of impending conflict momentarily lifting as he studied her. You have given me something equally valuable, he said. A reminder of why I chose to rule the way I do, and prove that the principles I have tried to uphold throughout my reign are worth defending, even when the cost may be high. Neither of them spoke further, though the unspoken understanding between them had grown clearer than ever, a bond forged not through calculated alliance or convenient advantage, but through shared principle and genuine respect, the very qualities that Damon's choice had so thoroughly failed to embody. As they rode toward the eastern border the following morning, Alena could not shake the feeling that whatever awaited them there would demand sacrifices from both of them far greater than either had yet imagined. The eastern border stretched out before them in the early morning light, a wide expanse of rolling hills that would soon become the site of a confrontation months in the making. Kieran's forces had arrived 2 days earlier, establishing a defensive position that took full advantage of the natural terrain, while the rogue faction, bolstered by resources and coordination from Serafina's family, gathered on the opposing ridge in numbers that made Elena's stomach tighten with worry. Kieran moved among his troops with the same quiet confidence Alena had come to recognize as fundamental to his character, checking on preparations, speaking directly with soldiers regardless of rank, ensuring that every wolf under his command understood both the stakes of the coming confrontation and the strategy meant to minimize unnecessary harm on both sides. Alena stayed close to the command tent, reviewing final reports and helping coordinate communication between different units, though she remained acutely aware of the guards Kieran had assigned specifically to her protection. On the morning the conflict finally began, messengers arrived from the opposing side carrying one final offer of negotiation, though the terms proved as unreasonable as before, demanding Elena's surrender along with formal recognition of the rogue faction's claim over the eastern territories. Kieran rejected the terms without hesitation, and within hours, the two forces began to engage across the contested hills. Alena watched from the command position as the defensive lines held steady, Kieran's forces using the terrain advantage to slow the rogue factions' advance while avoiding the kind of reckless engagement that would lead to unnecessary losses on either side. She had expected chaos, but what she witnessed instead was calculated restraint, Kieran's leadership evident even from a distance as messengers relayed his careful adjustments to strategy throughout the unfolding confrontation. As the day progressed, however, reports began arriving of a smaller group from the rogue faction attempting to flank the defensive position entirely, moving through a narrow valley pass that Kieran's forces had not fully secured. Alena recognized the location immediately from her earlier study of the border maps, understanding that this flanking maneuver, if successful, could reach directly toward the command position where she and several key advisors remained stationed. She brought this concern immediately to the attention of the guards assigned to her protection, insisting they relay the information to Kieran without delay. But before the message could reach him through proper channels, the flanking group emerged from the valley pass far sooner than anticipated, moving with clear purpose directly toward the command position. The guards around Alena moved quickly to establish a defensive perimeter, but the attacking group had clearly planned this maneuver specifically, their focus narrowing immediately onto Alena rather than spreading their efforts across the broader command staff. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that this had never simply been about military strategy. Someone within the rogue faction, likely acting on direct orders from Seraphina's family, had identified this moment as their opportunity to eliminate her as a witness before she could provide any further testimony against them. Word of the flanking attack reached Kieran within minutes, and he broke away from the main defensive line immediately, riding hard toward the command position with a small contingent of his most trusted guards. Alena, meanwhile, found herself caught in the middle of an increasingly desperate defense, the guards protecting her fighting to hold back an attacking force that seemed determined to reach her at any cost. The confrontation grew increasingly tense as the attacking group pressed forward, and Alena felt a cold certainty settle over her that the guards assigned to protect her, however skilled, might not be sufficient to hold back this determined assault indefinitely. She thought of Kieran's earlier words, about principles worth defending regardless of the cost, and found herself gripping the small knife her guardian had given her years ago, prepared to defend herself if the situation grew desperate enough to require it. Kieran arrived just as the defensive line around Alena began to falter, throwing himself directly into the confrontation with an intensity that immediately shifted the momentum of the engagement. Alena watched, her heart pounding, as he moved through the chaos with the same calm authority he had shown throughout every challenge she had witnessed him face, protecting his guards and pushing back the attacking force through sheer determination and skill. It was in the final moment of that desperate confrontation that Alena saw the true depth of what Kieran was willing to risk. One of the attacking wolves, recognizing that the tide had turned against their group, made a final desperate move directly toward Alena, breaking through the weakened perimeter with clear intent to reach her before retreating became the only option left. Kieran, seeing this attempt unfold in an instant, moved without hesitation, placing himself directly between Alena and the approaching threat. The confrontation that followed happened too quickly for Alena to fully process in the moment, though she would replay it countless times in the days that followed. Kieran took the full brunt of an attack meant for her, absorbing harm that would have otherwise fallen directly on someone with far less capacity to withstand it. He fell to the ground, and for one terrifying moment, Alena feared the worst had happened, that his willingness to protect her had cost him everything. The remaining guards quickly overwhelmed the attacking group, who scattered upon realizing their mission had failed and their numbers had been significantly reduced. Alena rushed to Kieran's side immediately, her training instinct and genuine fear driving her to assess the extent of his injuries with hands that trembled despite her efforts to remain calm. "He is breathing," she said aloud, more to reassure herself than anyone else nearby. "We need healers immediately." The guards moved quickly, some rushing to secure the immediate area while others helped carry Kieran back toward the main camp, where healers had already been stationed in anticipation of casualties from the broader conflict. Alena stayed by his side throughout the journey, refusing to leave despite suggestions that she rest or allow others to manage the situation. The following hours passed in a blur of anxious waiting as healers worked to address Kieran's injuries, the broader conflict along the border continuing without his direct command, though his advisors and military leaders proved capable of maintaining the defensive strategy he had established. Alena remained just outside the healing tent, unable to fully settle despite reassurances that Kieran's condition, while serious, was not considered life-threatening. Edmund found her there several hours later, his expression carrying a gravity she had not seen from him before. "He will recover," Edmund said, settling beside her. "The healers are confident, though he will need significant time to fully regain his strength." Alena felt relief wash over her so intensely that she had to steady herself against the nearby support beam. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Edmund studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You should know," he said, "that what he did today, throwing himself directly into harm's way to protect you, is not something I have witnessed him do for anyone else during his entire reign. He has always valued strategy and careful calculation above personal risk. Today, he abandoned that caution entirely." Alena did not know how to respond to this observation, though something in her chest tightened with an emotion she had been trying to avoid fully acknowledging throughout the preceding months. Meanwhile, word of the confrontation and Kieran's willingness to risk his own safety to protect Alena spread quickly through the ranks and beyond, eventually reaching Daemon's pack and, inevitably, Daemon himself. When Daemon learned the details of what had transpired, that the Alpha King had personally intervened to save the very woman he had discarded months earlier, something shifted in his understanding of everything that had happened since that night in the park hall. Daemon requested another audience, this time with Kieran directly once he had recovered sufficiently to receive visitors, and Alena found herself present for this conversation as well, curious to understand what Daemon hoped to accomplish through this meeting. "I wanted to see for myself," Daemon said, standing before Kieran's resting quarters with an expression of genuine humility Alena had never witnessed from him before. "That the stories reaching my pack were true. That you personally risked your life to protect someone I chose to discard for the sake of wealth and convenient alliance." Kieran, still recovering but clearly regaining his strength, regarded Daemon evenly. "Elena's worth was never dependent on wealth or alliance," he said. "You made a choice based on flawed priorities, and today's confrontation should make clear the cost of measuring value by anything other than genuine character and loyalty." Daemon absorbed this response quietly, his gaze shifting briefly toward Alena before returning to Kieran. "I understand that now," he said. "More clearly than I ever did before. I hope, in time, that some measure of the harm I caused can be addressed, though I recognize that Alena has found something in your court that my own choices ensured she would never find within my pack." Alena did not offer forgiveness in that moment, nor did she feel any particular need to. She had moved beyond the pain of that initial rejection, finding within Kieran's court a sense of purpose and respect that had reshaped her understanding of her own worth entirely. Daemon's acknowledgement of his mistake, however genuine, could not undo the path that had ultimately led her here, and she found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, grateful for that path rather than resentful of what had caused it. In the weeks that followed, the broader conflict along the eastern border concluded with Seraphina's family's conspiracy fully exposed, thanks in significant part to Daemon's testimony and the evidence Alena had helped uncover throughout the preceding months. The former alliance between Daemon's pack and Seraphina's family collapsed entirely once the tribunal reviewed the accumulated evidence, and Seraphina's family lost much of their standing among the northern packs as a direct result of their involvement in supporting the rogue faction. Kieran's recovery progressed steadily, and as his strength returned, so too did the quiet, unspoken understanding that had grown between himself and Alena throughout the months of investigation and conflict. It was during a quiet evening, weeks after the confrontation had fully resolved, that Kieran called for a formal gathering of his court, along with representatives from several allied packs, including a contingent from Daemon's own territory. Standing before the assembled crowd, Kieran spoke with the same quiet authority Alena had come to know so well since that first night on the path near the training grounds. "Months ago," he began, "I encountered a woman who had been discarded by her own pack, judged unworthy based on wealth and lineage rather than genuine character. In the time since, she has proven herself to be among the most capable, courageous, and principled individuals I have had the honor of knowing. Today, I wish to formally recognize what has become clear to me, and I suspect to many of you as well." He turned toward Alena, who stood near the front of the gathered crowd, her heart racing with anticipation she had not fully allowed herself to acknowledge until this exact moment. "Alena Voss," he said, "will you accept the position of Luna, not as a matter of political convenience or strategic alliance, but as a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared principle?" Alena felt tears gathering in her eyes, though they carried none of the pain that had marked her rejection months earlier. Instead, they reflected something entirely different, a recognition of how far she had come since that devastating night, and a genuine joy at the possibility now standing before her. "I accept," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. The assembled court erupted into genuine celebration, and Alena noticed, even amid her own overwhelming emotion, that Damon stood among the crowd, his expression a complicated mixture of regret and something approaching genuine happiness for the woman he had once discarded so carelessly. Whatever resentment Alena might have once carried toward him had largely faded, replaced instead by a quiet understanding that his mistake, however painful at the time, had ultimately led her toward a life far richer and more meaningful than anything his alliance with Serafina's family could have ever offered her. In the months that followed, Alena settled fully into her role as Luna, working alongside Kieran to strengthen the Northern Territories and ensure that smaller, disaffected packs found genuine representation within the broader structure of alliances he maintained. Together, they worked to address the underlying resentments that had allowed Serafina's family's conspiracy to gain such traction in the first place, ensuring that wealth and status would never again overshadow genuine character and loyalty within the territories under their protection. Alena often thought back to that devastating night in the park hall, to the humiliation and uncertainty that had defined her darkest moment. She recognized now that what had felt like the ending of everything she had built had, in truth, been the beginning of something far more meaningful, a partnership built not on convenient alliance or calculated advantage, but on genuine respect, shared principle, and the kind of loyalty that no amount of wealth could ever purchase. Standing beside Kieran during a quiet evening months later, watching the sun set over the valley from the balcony of the stronghold that had become her home, Alena felt a profound sense of gratitude for the winding path that had brought her here. The woman once discarded for lacking wealth or lineage had found, in the end, something far more valuable than either could have ever provided, a place where her true worth was seen, valued, and celebrated by someone willing to risk everything to protect it.